English translation, 697th contact, Part 1. Sunday, the 17th of December 2017, 22:18 hours, continued. Monday, the 18th of December 2017, 21:55 hours.
Eduard, dear friend, greetings. Today my time is once again somewhat limited, but I will come back tomorrow to answer your questions further and also to discuss a few things with you, also privately.
I also greet you, dear friend, and welcome. I was not expecting you today, but I am glad you are here, and maybe also again tomorrow. But I must say that you are quite reckless, because Piero has just locked the door in Ava's office.
I was just waiting for that, because I was watching everything closely, and so I also saw that after you watched a television program, you immediately came here with him to your workroom.
You surprised me because I did not know you could watch everything in our center from your giant spacecraft.
You, dear friend, do not consider our orbiting control apparatus, which we can also use for this kind of purpose among many other possibilities.
Oh, I had not actually thought of that. But with this control apparatus, as far as I know, other things are done and not constant monitoring, as you once told me.
That is correct, because it also monitors factors other than the center, which is important for us. But now about why I am visiting you today. The reason is that I want to bring you the answers to your questions that you have addressed to me about Injana and Florena. On the one hand, this concerns the matter of the night watch in the center, but for security reasons, you should not openly mention my explanations about this when you call up and write down the report of the conversation. So the following is to be said about this.
That is clear. Then I will just present the whole thing verbally at the next General Assembly.
That will be good. Then I will read you what I found in my father's annals about what you asked me about Florena and Injana. All of your questions, however, lead further than what you wanted. For all in all, they are far-reaching explanations and predictions which my father has explained to you. Unfortunately, I did not have the time to translate my father's notes from our Plejaren into German, so a linguist did it for me. Apart from all the things you asked, I have found various dates in my father's notes, which clarify some of my father's efforts for you during the first years of your life and should be of interest to Bernadette with regard to your biography. These are some notes that refer to your development of consciousness, etc., and state what my father did to prepare you for your life's task through initial impulses at an early age. I have found the following notes in my father's annals, which I have only translated in short form and not literally, but which show that the first impulsive and telepathic efforts were one-sided and only came from him, that they had an effect on you in a neutral way, and that you were already consciously aware of them at that time as a small child, and astonishingly processed them independently. 1937, Sunday, the 25th of July. Dangerously ill with pneumonia, the only possibility was medical intervention to bring about a quick cure. 1937, Wednesday, the 11th of August. Enduring impulse to promote language development and linguistic skills. 1938, Thursday, the 3rd of February 1st, and lasting impulses to learn attention, observation, and perception. 1939, Wednesday, the 3rd of May. Impulsive inspirations to learn independence and to carry out one's own conscious decisions and actions. 1939, Friday, the 7th of July, by foot and horse and cart to Zurich, Stauffacher, and back to Bulach with cart driver Nusli. 1940, Saturday, the 3rd of February, impulsive inspirations to independently learn and create interests of diverse forms. 1942, Saturday, the 6th of June, accidental attack by stray German fighter pilot who quickly flew back to Germany because he was being pursued by Swiss air fighters. 1942, Wednesday. The 4th of November, first meeting without conversation on Wednesday afternoon, the 4th of November, 1942, with Schwath in the Langenzingen, behind the Horrigan Vault at the glider pilot's private airfield. 1944. Thursday, the 3rd of February, first telepathic request for intensive learning, whereby reading and writing lessons as well as spiritual teaching were also connected with this in the same telepathic way. 1944, Saturday, the 2nd of June, first conversation with Svath and explanations. Saturday, the 2nd of June, 1944, during further flight at 70 kilometers altitude in pair beam ship. During the whole time of contact with Svath, many flights with his pair beam ship to foreign countries. 1945, from Saturday, the 17th of February. Particularly important and special teachings in continuous succession, along with all other learning until Svath's departure in 1953. But now listen to what my father explained to you on Saturday, the 17th of February, 1945, and also recorded everything, although the whole thing is more extensive than that to which your actual questions refer.
Eduard, the main reason for my lecturing you in this time of shameful, bestial, horrible, vicious, totally destructive and disastrous world war, I have already explained to you several times. But today I have many important things to teach you, according to which, on the one hand, you must direct your life and your attitude, and on the other hand, you must learn a great deal in this respect. On the other hand, I have many things to tell you today concerning the future of this world and its humanity, but also concerning the coming events, whereby I first want to give you an instruction that will accompany you through your life and will be a part of your behavior. Eduard, you must be powerful in your life, but you must never use your might in a disloyal way, Ptaah's note. In a wrong way, nor in any other way, nor in a self-satisfied way, nor in a way that makes you want to rule over your fellow human beings. On the contrary, you will, and it will be your duty, have to live your sense of responsibility, be modest and only teach, instruct, advise, help, be honest, peaceful, and give notice in accordance with creation. You will fight for everything with your might by right and just means in a peaceful, just correct way and with a clear mind and just reason in order to bring about real good. And this also when you will be insulted by evil adversaries against your better knowledge with slander to the contrary. Many of these adversaries will be believers in Christ who will believe that they are above creative reality and truth, because their obedient religious faith, as well as their thoughts and aspirations, are grotesque and thus strangely, outlandishly, and ridiculously directed towards a God invented by human beings of this world. The German name, Gott, God, corresponds to many changes, transformations, and alterations of the most ancient term, Gudayana, which originates from the original language of the universal proclaimer Nokodemion and means creation, in which the meaning of creation and universe is fundamentally anchored. The term Gudana was brought into this world some 13,500 years ago, after which it has been altered, transformed, and used for an imagined higher might in many languages over the millennia. As a result, the actual meaning and value of the word also underwent a complete change, whereby human beings invented a being for the original meaning of creation and universe, who was supposed to be responsible for the creation of the world and the heavens. So the term Gudana was transformed into a completely wrong meaning of a higher entity, which found its way into the earthly languages as God. There are other forms of the origin of the term God, but when it was brought to this world ages ago, from the very beginning, Then also in much later times, variations, abbreviations, and changes arose from it in various languages of the human beings of this world. In the north of the world, for example, note Ptaah. Europe, abbreviations like GU, good, and in further languages and changes, also Guth, God, good, and Got arose, as originally in other countries also Alan, Don, On, Manu, Saiwan, Kut, Kot, and Kokot, etc., with which various meanings were associated, but which ultimately always pointed to a creative force, might, and entity which was personified according to human incomprehension and in a further and final change of terminology called God and finally conceived as God Creator. If now, however, in the understanding of the term God in every use of language in our day and age, it is thought of, understood, and used in its origin as creation, a creation and universe, then it can be used in this sense in a correct manner, but indeed only in the understanding of this sense, but never in the form of a religious belief of a confused religious doctrine of faith by which in every case solely and always a worshipable creator, God and God the Father, is meant. A human being can also justifiably be called God if he possesses and cultivates the predominant character trait of love, and thus for him the welfare of human beings is paramount. To be able to call a human being God in this sense means that his commitment in every conceivable way to other human beings and all living things, note Ptaah, all of nature, fauna, flora, and the universe must be the highest thing he can accomplish in love. His love, therefore, cannot be an emotional love, but only a living and acting love that bestows everything. The designation God for a human being also requires of him self-sufficiency, and through his being, there must also be justice and moral equality, goodness and mercy, forbearance, understanding, and all beneficial qualities for fellow human beings. Also, if a human being is to be named God, he must be resourceful, inventive, industrious, imaginative, artistic, helpful, beneficial, honest, compassionate, peaceful, and successful, as well as productive, rich in consciousness, musical, intelligent, creative, gifted, ingenious, witty, original, active, educative, talented, knowledgeable, constructive, and effective, etc., and he must live righteously as well as altogether creatively, and moreover in accordance with creation, which, however, has in no way anything to do with a higher power of creation, as well as nothing to do with a confused, religiously conceived creator God, and also not with creation or creation and the universe. The possibility of the existence of such a human being would be a state of the highest possible perfection, which may be possible in the infinite reaches of heaven, note Ptaah, universe with very highly developed human beings, with very isolated human beings, but will not be the case on this world, note Ptaah, Earth, for an unimaginable amount of time. Due to degenerate beliefs, human beings have also fallen prey to thoughts, emotions, and degenerate forms of behavior in very early times, through which other human beings were persecuted, murdered, and war was also waged on peoples if they were of a different faith than those who were bent on hatred and revenge. The otherness of the different groups of people also played a major role, as did the food that was fought over. Out of all this were born unspeakable evils, which took shape as vices: conceit, agitation, envy, excitement, hatred, greed, false expectation, and confused hope, passion, rage and anger, intoxication, hysteria, extravagance, restlessness, and overexcitement of all kinds. Everything also produced wild fantasies and mirages, illusions, and confused delusions, which became ever more profound and ended in a morbid delusion of belief, from which religions were finally formed. For many thousands of years, through the delusion of what would at first only very small, diverse religions, people have sworn by an unreal God invented by human beings, who was, at first, only regarded as a mirage, animal, object, sun, human being or moon, etc., but in later times as God, who is supposed to sit on a heavenly throne and who was perversely elevated by the God-believers of all times to the status of a creator God. This non-existent and man-invented God is said by those who believe in him to have created the universe and the stars, as well as everything in general, to be love itself, and to be forbearing and just, although at the same time he demands punishment and even death for mistakes committed and holds human beings responsible for their weaknesses and imperfections, although he is supposed to determine all actions and deeds of human beings himself. The case, however, is different from what the God-believers assume, for it was not a God who conceived and created the human beings, but they invented this God and devised the fantasy and delusion in this respect, which they worship and adore in their confusion. They have fallen prey to this fantasy, being in their delusion, and have lost themselves in the process, which has been the reason from the beginning that they have fallen prey to envy, vices, excitements, conceits, surges, hatred, false expectations, greed, hopes, passions, rage, and anger, states of intoxication, hysteria, overexcitement, unrest, and overexcitement. This has prevented them, and will continue to prevent them today and in the future, from becoming independent and blameless, self-responsible, peaceful, self-confident, of good character and blameless, etc., as well as from attaining true humanity. And this is what the human beings of this world have done, because through their wickedness and depravity they have made themselves incapable, and still do, of governing themselves and of living without illusions and without divine delusions. So they have delusionally created an unreal God, and thus a supreme being to suit their needs. So they have created the need for God existence and firmly believe in it. Every rational human being puts a good face on the evil and erroneous game, while the believers, in their confusion, perceive that their invented God receives their prayers, signs, acts, and helps them in need and misery. The truth, however, is that every believing human being's God of faith serves only as a pretext for the most foolish claims and for his guilty conscience. And so wars are also started in his name, and revolutions are led, murders are committed, and even punishments punishable by death. According to their needs, the believers in God make of their God what they want, and for what he is useful to them at the moment. But the throne of this man-made God will begin to shake, for in the times to come, many believers will fall away from him, because they will no longer feel like continuing to play a believing role for an invented god who will increasingly become a comical figure. The alleged might of God, and with it the monarchy of God, will be abolished by many human beings in the times to come, and it will be these who will one day strive for real peace and frown upon the quarrelsomeness and warmongering, all evil, all degenerate evils of human beings, and who will finally no longer call upon and worship the God invented by confused human beings as the representative and supreme authority of all the powers of an obsolete, delusional faith. With regard to the power of human beings in general, there is also much to be explained, as well as that which has been the greatest evil of human beings since time immemorial, namely that they selfishly and self-purposefully strive for power and want to dominate their fellow human beings, rule over them and elevate themselves above all others. In doing so, they develop an obsession with power that knows no bounds and leads to vicious, degenerate violence up to and including human bestiality, to wars, intrigues, murders, bloodlust, and every conceivable kind of degeneracy. And for many reasons, this began with human beings in primeval times and has continued up to the present day, as a result of which innumerable human beings have been bestially murdered and humanly created values of many kinds have been destroyed and even irrevocably annihilated, as well as unspeakable suffering, misery, and great hardship, and ever-increasing hatred and vendettas have arisen against those who, for some crazy reason or other, were regarded as enemies. And this has continued to the present day and will continue into the distant future, with power-crazed and vengeful human beings pushing their way into positions of authority, and when they have achieved their desired positions of power, exercising their lust for power. In doing so, they instigate wars, devise punishments and decrees in order to spread death and destruction and to get rid of unwelcome adversaries, just as they oppress the people with all kinds of inadequate laws and exploit them through highly exaggerated taxes in order to enrich themselves on the one hand, or to squander the revenues senselessly and accumulate debts on the other. For a human being obsessed with power, might is not a means to a good end, but a degenerate end in itself. Normally, might is that which makes it possible to create something of value. Thus, human beings need power in order to be able to achieve something. But since time immemorial, human beings have abused it for selfish, violent, destructive, and deadly purposes, and unspeakable misery and destruction have been brought upon the Earth's population. With genocides and exterminations of peoples, note Ptaah, genocides also in the offing, as by the Nazi regime in the currently still ongoing Third World War. The Nazi leader Adolf Hitler, too, is afflicted by an irrepressible obsession with power, and he exercises his criminal and inhuman power for the sake of power, as a result of which tens of millions of human beings have already died in acts of war, and many millions of innocent Jewish people have also been murdered as a result of hatred of the Jews. And such mass exterminations of believers in other religions, note Ptaah, religious genocides, and their splinter groups, note Ptaah, sects, have been carried out through wars and ghastly massacres since time immemorial, but this has continued to the present day and will continue to do so. In just a few decades, the same thing will happen again in a very bad way through a religiously degenerated horror brood, note Ptaah. Terrorist organization IS, Islamist State, starting from Arabia and then spreading worldwide. The obsession of human beings with power is so degenerated in this world that countless people are willing to do anything for their power, even over countless human lives, to be murdered. Thus, mankind must take care that when obsession with power is recognized in one or the other, Providence's note, Ptaah, and precautionary measures are taken to stop such power-hungry people if possible. And this must always be done before the power-obsessed can get into offices of authority and seize power and exercise their dictatorial, power-greedy tyranny, usually with the help of like-minded people and by bribing the maliciously influenced and the morally likewise depraved. Often human beings who are well-disposed apply for positions of authority in politics because they want to achieve something good. But then, when they come to power, power also gradually becomes an end in itself for many of them, and consequently the lust for power also breaks through in them. The inevitable consequence is that, in order to gain, maintain and dominate the human beings and peoples, they develop a form of violence in which they will use any means, irrespective of morality and law, to exercise their power and achieve their desired goal of domination. If there are people in an environment who are perceived as greedy for power, however, it must always first be well considered and correctly judged whether there is a real greed for power, because it is often customary among human beings to attribute greed for power to others who are not greedy for power, but fundamentally mean well and also work and act for the good of their fellow human beings and are prepared to do good things, just as they also know how to take on and bear responsibility. Therefore, it must always be examined what the concerns of human beings are in the first place. If human beings seek and exercise power for the sake of power and prestige, then this corresponds to a dark and sinister lust for power, which brings violence, bloodshed, oppression, and, as a rule, murder and manslaughter, uprisings, wars, and destruction. Therefore, when human beings seek this kind of power and are also prepared to cheat for it, to wage war, to commit murder, killing, and oppression, and to use other criminal means without conscience, then this is to be called degeneracy and lust for power. And this should not be tolerated by human beings from any other human being. But everyone and the whole human community would have to defend themselves against it with reason and rationality, using non-violent means. And in this way, everything should be brought out into the open by just means of explanation and action, in order to enlighten and prevent those who are obsessed with power from attaining authority and neither realizing nor living out their desires for power. To have and exercise a sense of responsibility means for human beings to always, and in every case, always achieve a good cause, to stand up for a good and correct cause, and to know that everything must always and in every case be achieved in a good and peaceful way and be placed in an acceptably good position of responsibility. The human beings must assert themselves in a peaceful, just manner with a clear mind and sound reason without any display of power, and this also when they are in leading positions and have to lead and guide their fellow human beings. In doing so, everything must be good and orderly, and nothing bad may be involved, for the meaning must always be for a good cause, just as the means for this must always be good and lawful, and those responsible, as well as all human beings in general, should never go over corpses, not even in a figurative sense. That is as far as it goes for the time being. But now I will tell you where I come from, for I have not yet told you, but you yourself have found out that I am not of earthly birth, but that I come from far away, from another world. This is very far from the earth, and moreover in another spaciousness. Note, Ptaah, dimension. Outside of what you see in the sky with all the stars. Note, Ptaah, universe. And where I have already led you out into the spaciousness of the sky for the contemplation of the near worlds. Note, Ptaah. Soul system planets with my flying apparatus is only this sky. Note, Ptaah, world space of this dimension, for the other spaciousness whence I come is present far beyond this celestial spatiality. You are not yet able to grasp this, but through my teachings in other terms, you will understand in a few days what I have made you think about with my explanation. You will also learn more, as now I have to explain to you that my homeland in the other spaciousness belongs to a structure of stars. Note, Ptaah, star cluster, which is called by us Pleiarin. Although you must conceal this name when you already begin your task in the next few years and begin to spread your first literary task works. Note, Ptaah, written missionary works. And it will be very important that you keep silent about my origin, as well as about the origin of my flying apparatus. Your silence will be of great importance, for if you become known in the world by name and by association with me and all my successors, there will be much deceit, fraud, and slander by malicious men, charlatans, and self-seekers, who, on the one hand, will make themselves known lyingly as associates with me, my successors, or on the other hand, also with some fantastic origin from other worlds. Note, Ptaah, extraterrestrials, which will be cunningly invented by them. This is the reason why, during the next decades, you must not call our name Pleiarin, but in your speeches and written publications, you must only call the name Pleiades, which refers to the structure of stars in this celestial space. Note, Ptaah, universe, in which the Earth also revolves around the Sun. These are still young and inanimate star formations, which on Earth are also called Atlantides. Atlantides, Pleiades, Seven Sisters, and Glugheni. Note, Ptaah, 745, and which are part of the galactic system of this celestial space, which the inhabitants of Earth call the Milky Way. If you will speak and write of Pleiades instead of Pleiarin, then liars, deceivers, and slanderers will expose themselves, because their claims to be in contact with beings from the Pleiades or with other beings from other alien worlds will become untenable, although they will first be carelessly called so-called true contactees by your adversaries. But those who will lie that they are in direct or indirect contact with us, Pleiarin, will then be convicted of the lie by you. When my followers instruct you to name our true origin in due time, namely the star formations of the Pleiarin, according to which we also call ourselves Pleiarin. And our spaciousness exists far beyond the Pleiades of this present celestial spatiality. The lies, deceptions, and slander by many malicious charlatans and self-seekers around the world will come to pass already in 7 years, and thus, in 1952, when you will have followed my instructions and sent a letter together with Reverend Zimmerman to various media, military, and rulers in the United States of America and the Soviet Union in 3 years. I will draft the letter in English myself, which you will then have to hand over to Pastor Zimmerman, after which he will himself make a copy and the necessary copies and send them, as he has already been instructed to do by me, in large numbers, to the relevant recipients in the United States of America and the Soviet Union. He will find the necessary addresses in due course, but you and he are to remain silent in this matter. This will have to be done in order to inform the important people of the authorities and the military forces what it was and still is concerning all the flying apparatuses unknown to them, which have been observed around the world in former times and also during the World War period, which are called Foo Fighters, are future note Ptaah from the future and also come from alien worlds, but which will continue to appear in all times to come. This will lead as early as 1952 in the United States of America through malice, charlatanry, and selfishness to the first cunning lies, frauds, and slanders being spread throughout the world concerning alleged connections of earthlings with beings and flying apparatus from Venus and other alien worlds. And this will continue in this way for many decades until the third millennium, whereby, on the contrary, your real connection with me and those who follow me will be shamefully abused by adversaries, and you will be accused of lies, fraud, and charlatanry around the world, and will also have to reckon with physical attacks and attacks against your life, even from your own ranks, for you will found a community with many co-workers. Malicious treacheries or treacheries shaped by stupidity, hatred, selfishness, self-love, egoism, unfulfillable lust for power, as well as self-importance, imprudence, and false trustfulness will arise against you and your work through long-standing confidence and even from your own family. Haters, envious people, other evil-minded adversaries, religious misconceptions, and the media will unleash a malicious, scurrilous, and slanderous debate and controversy against you and your association with me and my successors all over the world, and I will also be joined by your wife, who will never be a true companion, and one of your sons. And when I speak of this, I also associate it with your future, which will bring you much joy and suffering with female beings, but will strengthen you and make you fit for life. Already as a young and also as an adult man, you will be taken in and desired by many young and older females, but this will demand a great deal of resistance from you in order to preserve and keep your dignity and honor, to go your own way, and to keep to the moral order. And in order to strengthen you in this way, I will instruct you from the point of view of morality, virtues, and ethics, as a female personality will do after my departure, and will also instruct you in this way. By this, you will also learn to be very selective, note Ptaah, selective with regard to relationships and intercourse with females, and to end an attachment sooner if a demand arises that exceeds companionable intimacies. Therefore, it will be then that you will evade such a request and urge, and will not be at will, but will give up the relationship and go on alone again if your non-sensual non-sensual, platonic, non-corporeal behavior is not met with understanding. But you will also experience much suffering and sorrow if, as a young man, you find a loving companion in 2 foreign countries. For twice, happiness will never be with you for long, and fate will separate you again through misfortune and death. Afterwards, you will enter into a longer relationship in your homeland and travel together with her through some European countries, But your companion will betray you after some time, and do this again and again, and finally go away, after which you will go your own way again. Then you will find another companion in a foreign land, and you will be devoted to each other in love. But this short happiness will also not be permanent for you, because your plans will be destroyed by shameful human beings, and you will be alone again. But you will cultivate a loving, non-sensual note. Ptaah, non-sensual, platonic, non-corporeal friendship in your homeland for a number of years with a young friendship companion, and you will always find yourselves together when you return to your homeland from your wanderings through the world. After many years, however, when you marry in a foreign land, you will also lose sight of each other. Then it will be another time that you will experience great suffering when you find another loving companion in a foreign land. But you will also lose her through death, after which it will still happen that you will also be overcome by a serious misfortune in a foreign land and lose your left arm. After this, the time will come when, in another foreign land, you will be united with a young girl and marry her. But this will not bring you happiness, but only a great deal of suffering, joylessness, discord, damage to your health, and quarrels lasting for many years, because this spouse will not be a loving companion, but an unseemly person, full of imperiousness and quarrelsomeness, as well as spitefulness and dishonesty. Nevertheless, you will stand by her and beget a daughter and 2 sons with her before she openly betrays you and your work and goes her own way, parting from you. But all this must happen so that you may also learn endurance and resistance to much evil, innumerable attacks, insults, lies, and slander, to which you will be exposed by spiteful, guileful, deceitful, insidious, double-tongued, malicious, vile, devious, lying, and begrudging adversaries all over the world. If you begin your work in an open manner, practice it, and carry it out into the world. You will therefore need a very strong power of resistance and willpower, because you will be exposed to massive attacks against your honor, integrity, and dignity, which will also lead to attacks against your life. Therefore, you have a great deal to learn. Also, with regard to the development of a sensitive sense perception, through which you will be able to perceive warning inner impulses, note Ptaah, vibrational impulses, and protect yourself from harm through appropriate behavior. But you will also be exposed to many other factors during many years of your life, so you must learn to stand up to everything and become strong and capable. And only then, when you learn everything, will you be able to accomplish your difficult task and parry all the malicious attacks in the form of nagging and disapproving critics. Further, you will also learn to ignore all the innumerable lying, untenable, and slanderous accusations, hostilities, insults, abuses coming towards you and directed against you, and also all the attacks and hostilities arising against your life, honor, dignity, integrity, trustworthiness, and decency. So you will also be taught and instructed by me to behave in a thoughtful, consistent, and correct manner, whereby very often silence will be the best weapon against bitter character assassination and slander, whereby you will also have to keep yourself in the background in your work as a whole, and must not display a sense of publicity. Note Ptaah, sense of public appearance. with regard to all the often very difficult things you will experience in your life. I have to prepare and instruct you during the next years so that you will actually further develop your joy of life and dignity of life, never lose it again, and never despair. And you will need these abilities in order to be able to pass them on to many people who will need your help, because they will lose their sense of life, but through your help will find it and their confidence in life again. But now I have to explain what will happen later in your life, when you have long since spread your work through writing and word in many countries, for which I have to tell you that after the divorce and departure of your wife, who is incapable of love but addicted to quarreling, you will build a meeting place and note, Asana Center with like-minded people. Ptaah said that you will unite in deep love with a loving young ally and confidant, and adopt as your own a son whom she will bring into union with you. This will finally be your life spouse and real, very loving life companion in an unchosen way. Even more than all that I have announced to you up to now, and all that I have to explain further now and also later, I want to mention only briefly today, for all the extensive connections of the explanations are still to be named and explained with regard to many things, events and occurrences, etc., which will come upon you in your life, and which will be far-reaching and very deeply formative events for you, are so extensive, unusual, and often tragic that I must explain them to you in particular detail at a later time, because only through a comprehensive explanation of all things can you really understand everything and be able to cope with it in every necessary way. Furthermore, I must explain that the 11 years of time you will spend with me in this present plane will never be sufficient for you to learn everything so that you can be prepared for everything necessary in your life and for your great task. So we must extend the time by years, which will also be so in connection with my succession, which will take you into its care after my departure. But this can only be done by controlling and shifting, note Peter, manipulating time and using it outside the present plane in planes of the past or future, as I have already done several times with you since 1942 and have let you observe and see different countries, many significant, interesting, instructive things, and also several theaters and events of war, etc. This will naturally make you older by all the times, which will be years, but this will not have a strong effect on your body, because in spite of your additional times in other planes of other celestial spaces, Ptaah's note, other dimensions or space-time structures, you will certainly age, but you will retain your youthfulness until your old age. It will be the same if you continue your learning with those who follow me in commitment for longer or shorter periods of time outside the present plane, in planes of the past or future. And all that has been done thus far in this way has been inevitable for your learning, your personal development, and for your future hard work, which will have many more different conditions, qualities, problems, subjects, circumstances, and connections, etc., than a man of this world and of your age could ordinarily learn, understand, and also cope with. Even for the very great mass of humanity on this earth, it would be impossible to learn, experience, and come to terms with all this in a sensible way, and not become insane in the process, as you must do. But all this is inexorably necessary for you, which is why we must continue to use the times of the past and the future, for only in this way do we gain long times note, Ptaah, more years, enough to use for your learning. So it must be that I take you away from the present for more or less or longer times, which may be days, weeks, months, or years, during which you have strictly to learn, after which I bring you back at the same time to the same present time from which I took you away. In this way you will not be missed by your parents and siblings, nor by anyone else, nor at school, for through the control and shifting of time, note Ptaah, time manipulation, it will be that you will always be present in the present plane and at the time that prevails here. And this must be so because the 11 years in this present plane alone would never be enough to teach you all that you have to learn. You will, of course, also age by the times during which you learn outside the present time prevailing here in this world in other time periods, but it will be that you will nevertheless remain youthful until old age. With this, I have given the first necessary explanations, but further I must instruct you that in the times to come you must warn Earth humanity of further threatening and great dangers which will continue to threaten the world and humanity even after the end of this war in the coming month of May. The lust for power and domination, the vindictiveness and heinous irresponsibility of the rulers of the government and the military powers of the United States of America will completely destroy and lay waste 2 great cities in Japan by means of new kinds of bombs with tremendous destructive power. In the process, hundreds of thousands of people will be killed, which will then bring this still raging world war to a real end in the Far East as well. Even if you do not yet understand what such a bomb is, which is also called an atomic bomb, among other names, I will briefly explain what it is. Later I will teach you more about it, but today I want to explain to you that these bombs are based on a principle of atomic fission. This means splitting the atom, which is considered the tiniest, and precisely the tiniest particle that supposedly cannot be split, as has been misguided since time immemorial. In fact, however, this assumption does not correspond to reality because the atom can be split, under which another 6 particle levels are assigned to the natural levels. The process of atomic fission is also called nuclear fission, and it belongs to a process of nuclear physics in which an atomic nucleus is separated or decomposed into 2 or more components under an enormous release of energy. If an atomic bomb is detonated, an uncontrolled chain reaction takes place, whereby the number of nuclear fissions increases rapidly and enormously, releasing unimaginable amounts of energy in an explosion, killing, destroying, and annihilating everything that falls within its explosion range and destruction wave range. This is what I have to explain to you for the time being regarding this dangerous bomb, whereby I will let you observe from my flying machine the first of these dangerous and deadly events. But back to the still ongoing World War, which has been going on since 1939 and will only come to its terrible end in Europe in this year, 1945, in the month of May, while in the Far East this will only be in August, after American atomic bombs have destroyed 2 Japanese cities in a criminal manner, and hundreds of thousands of people will have been killed with them. This world war, and I must also explain this, is not the second global war as is claimed, but the third, because the first was already fought in the years 1756 to 1763. However, all the great powers and many other countries of the 20th century are now involved in this world war, and this event represents the largest military conflict in the history of mankind in this world to date. But the end of this war will not also be the end of enmities, for even after this still prevailing war, it will continue as it has since time immemorial. After the collapse of the Nazi Empire, the United States of America, in its self-importance, will proclaim itself the sole victor in the world and will continue to maintain its enmity against the Soviet Union. This will create a very dangerous state of affairs, which will be called the Cold War, through which for about 50 years there will be a constant threat of a new war between the great powers and a further use of atomic bombs. Also on the part of the Soviet Union, where, as a result of espionage, atomic weapons will also be developed, as will later be the case in several other countries. Also, until well into the third millennium, there will constantly be many dozens of uprisings, revolts, revolutions, civil wars, wars between nations, hatreds and overthrows of governments, etc. around the world, year after year, 80% of which, as has always been the case, will always be caused by deceitful intrigues, machinations, interference, Secret Service actions and acts of violence on the part of the United States of America. And as since time immemorial, they will continue to disregard the self-government and independence note Ptaah, sovereignty of foreign countries, interfering in their affairs in an unasked-for, high-handed and power-obsessed manner, not even shying away from politically motivated assassinations and vicious armed violence. As a result, the future will be such that large parts of the whole world will be more and more dominated by the power of America, and the American enmity against the Soviet Union will be maintained, which on the one hand has always been characterized by a cowardly fear on the part of the powerful of the United States of America, but on the other hand by their lust for power to bring the Soviet Union under American domination. And in order to foster hostility against the Soviet Union among the American population and among pro-American countries, as will later be done against the newly emerging Russia, the ruling powers of the United States of America will do everything possible to advance the arms industry. And this will be done in order then to supply the countries which will be stirred up against the Soviet Union and later against Russia by American fomented propaganda of enmity with large masses of ever more modern weapons of war and other war material, in the sense that these are to be used against the Soviet Union and later against Russia and speculatively, possibly also against China, should another world war provoked by the United States of America be triggered off. In this way, early and very secret precautionary plans already exist among the American government elite, which are to be carried forward into the future when the still ongoing world war will be brought to an end by a gruesome murder and destruction scenario with very dangerous bombing missions in Japan in the coming month of August, which, however, will trigger even much greater dangers of war, fear, and terror among the entire world population than has ever been the case before. This will continue into the third millennium, when the Soviet Union loses its communist power in almost 50 years and then falls into economic decline and is transformed into a Russian Federation as a successor state of the Soviet Union. And this danger and the fear and the terror of the whole of humanity of another global war will arise again in the third millennium through the fault of the United States of America, because they will also carry on the hostile agitation against the new Russia and incite and drive America-friendly countries to hostility towards Russia. On the other hand, this will also lead to the emergence of enmities against the United States of America in other countries, which will be harassed by American interference in some form or other and will therefore become dangerous arch-enemies. At the same time, when the Soviet Union is coming to an end and a new Russia will emerge, a Union dictatorship note. Ptaah, Europe Union dictatorship will form in Europe and bind many European countries to itself, whose leaders and populations will allow themselves to be unthinkingly, gullibly, foolishly, and trustingly integrated into the underhandedly and lyingly peaceful, liberal and people uniting, but real Europe Union dictatorship, which calls itself the European Union, and will be exploited by it through large annual financial contributions. But after years, the truth will be revealed that it is all lies and deception, and the true essence of the Union. Dictatorship will break through, and internal strife will arise, when the dictatorship will also demand high taxes from the member states for nonsensical things, such as the necessary use of plastics and all kinds of other materials, useful objects and consumer goods, etc., to enrich the dictatorship. If the leaders and populations revolt against the subjugating machinations of the Union dictators, which in one case or another will also lead to expulsions from this dictatorship. And I will have to repeat everything several times, that it will also be through the blatant unreasonableness of certain short-thinking, inexperienced, unwise, uncritical and ignorant rulers of Switzerland and parts of the Swiss population, incapable of misjudging facts, that Switzerland and its population will also fall into the clutches of the Union dictatorship, whereby, however, the intellect and reason of the state leaders and the people of Switzerland will be called upon to determine what will become and what should be. And this Union dictatorship will constantly and more impose dictatorial repression and force Switzerland to commit itself more and more with treaties in favor of the country and people suppressing Union dictatorship. This will drive Switzerland more and more viciously under the domineering thumb of this Union dictatorship through compulsory regulations, whereby the Swiss state and its population will lose many freedoms. Also, Switzerland and its population will then, if they get into the mill of the unstoppable Union dictatorship, be forced to act only according to the laws, directives, and treaty regulations of the Union dictatorship, just as they will also have to adopt the death penalty again, which will be introduced by the Union dictatorship, but which was abolished in Switzerland in 1942 in the Civil Penal Code, and will also be abolished in 1992 for wartime in the Military Penal Code. Ultimately, Switzerland's neutrality will also be called into question. Demilitarization will be demanded, and military personnel will have to be made available for an army of the Union dictatorship. And it will be that responsible rulers of Switzerland who will negotiate with the rulers of this Union dictatorship will irresponsibly submit to the unfreedom and dictatorial demands by treaty, and thus drive their own homeland and population more and more into membership with the Union dictatorship. Furthermore, the member states of this dictatorship will be outrageously exploited with large financial dictatorial contributions, Just as in the course of time, Switzerland will also be financially exploited by the dictatorship through clumsy and stupid government negotiators. 152. This will also apply to Switzerland, which will be financially exploited by the dictatorship through the ignorance, unreasonableness, and irresponsibility of leading and responsible government officials, as well as that part of the people who at that time will live in ignorance and support the Union dictatorship. This is because, due to the ignorance, irrationality, and irresponsibility of leading and responsible government officials from the federal parliament, as well as that part of the people who will live in ignorance and support the Union dictatorship, Switzerland will pay high sums in the millions and billions to the Union dictatorship in order to maintain, promote, and guarantee cohesion between the dictatorship and the individual member states, while the Swiss people will be financially exploited for this. Note, Ptaah, cohesion payments. As a result, Switzerland would become a financial vassal state of the Union dictatorship, which would deprive the country and its people of many freedoms, and would then be forced to act only in accordance with the laws, directives, and treaty regulations of the Union dictatorship, as well as ultimately calling into question neutrality, the Swiss army and state and private gun laws. And it will be that irresponsible, responsible rulers of Switzerland, who on the one hand are politically clueless and incapable of governance, and on the other hand are also flirting with the Union dictatorship, will negotiate with the high-handed rulers of this Union dictatorship, irresponsibly submitting to the unfreedom and dictatorial demands of the treaty, and thus driving their own homeland and the population more and more into the constraints and into slavish membership of this Union dictatorship. Further, Switzerland, like all the member states of this dictatorship, will be outrageously exploited by large financial contributions, as will also result in the peoples of the member states of this dictatorship being terrorized and exploited by their own dictatorially inclined leaders. With regard to Switzerland, in the long run, it will be creepingly disarmed, demilitarized, and finally included in the Union dictatorship itself, as well as in a Union dictatorship army through well-calculated underhand treaties, if the naive and Union dictatorship-friendly of the government and the population agree to the underhand demands, plans, and treaties of the dictatorship. The whole thing will apply in this way to Switzerland if, as a result of the ignorance, unreasonableness, and irresponsibility of leading and responsible rulers and of the ignorant and unreasonable part of the people, who at that time are living in blindness and ignorance, the repressive demands of the Union dictatorship are advocated. This will be when Switzerland, and thus its entire population, as a result of the stupidity of those responsible in the government, would conclude agreements with the Union dictatorship through which Switzerland, as a state, and also the population will then be financially exploited by the dictatorship, because Switzerland will then pay high amounts in the millions and billions to the Union dictatorship in order to maintain, promote, and guarantee cohesion between the dictatorship and the individual member states. Note Ptaah, cohesion payments. As a result, Switzerland and its people will be financially exploited and harassed and deprived of independence through Union dictatorship laws and insidious dictatorial rules, regulations, and ordinances. And this will happen if uninformed or dictatorship-friendly country negotiators as well as the uninformed part of the people, allow themselves to be blinded by the dictatorship rulers, and they will submit to the insidious demands of the Union dictatorship against the will of the thoughtful and reasonable Swiss people by means of anti-freedom resolutions, unfair treaties, and coercion. Only if the people of Switzerland oppose this action of those responsible but irresponsible rulers who want to accept underhand treaty demands and stipulations of the Union dictatorship by popular decisions, if they do not allow themselves to be misled in their ignorance by the rulers, will they remain free. This is the only way to prevent Switzerland from becoming a servile vassal state of this Union dictatorship. But if those responsible for the country and the unreasonable part of the people will not be attentive and allow themselves to be deceived by the dictatorship despotism, then it will inevitably happen, as it will happen throughout the world among many peoples through the action of America, that an extremely unpeaceful state of affairs will develop between this Europe-encompassing dictatorship and Switzerland. Just as, however, no real peace can come about in the whole world, because against all reason and rationality, the hitherto existing and time-honored delusion of the power-obsessed and the masses of the ignorant in the peoples will continue. With regard to strife throughout the world, the United States of America will continue to lead the way, as it has always done with all the states of the earth, and in its desire for world domination will ceaselessly create strife everywhere on earth, interfere in the affairs of foreign countries, and, as always, bring the world into turmoil with acts of war, murder, and crime. And it would come to pass, if Switzerland should negligently and recklessly submit to dictatorship, that the neutrality of the country, as well as its peace and liberty, would be as seriously damaged as they would be in regard to the population. If this should really happen, then, on the instructions of the Union dictatorship, the freedom of information, opinion, and the press would finally be restricted, just as the dictatorial machinations would also infiltrate the order and laws of Switzerland and make it compulsorily a servile vassal state. Moreover, the freedom of information, which will be guaranteed by law in the future, as well as the Swiss governmental duty to inform, would be suppressed and prevented in such a way that the population would no longer be informed about certain actions, treaties and machinations, etc., in connection with the Union dictatorship, but everything would be handled and controlled secretly by the governmental authorities. And if Switzerland were to be affected by this, then discord and dissatisfaction would break out among the Swiss people and possibly disturb the peace and freedom in the country to such an extent that nationwide resistance could result and lead to civil war. And it would be as it was when, in 1918, a nationwide domestic crisis threatened and the Federal Council deployed the army of more than 100,000 soldiers equipped with machine weapons to proceed unhesitatingly with vicious violence against the striking population and to accept many deaths if the nationwide strike could not have been broken off and the people forced to surrender by threats. But as there would be no real peace and no true freedom in the whole world in the coming times and also in the new millennium, but as war threats and war actions will again and again intimidate and frighten mankind, the old traditional delusion of the power-obsessed and the masses of the ignorant in the peoples will continue to exist against all reason and rationality. In the front line in the third millennium, as since time immemorial, the danger of warmongering will also emanate particularly strongly from the United States of America, which will create strife and lack of freedom worldwide, and will attempt to bring more and more countries of the earth under its absolute control. And it will then be further that, through the machinations of the Union dictatorship, Switzerland will suffer damage to its neutrality, and its population will become more and more addicted to strife and unfreedom. The longer, the more the dictatorship will try to drive Switzerland into its clutches in an ever more insidious, harsh and harassing and slowly compelling manner. And if the Swiss people and their responsible rulers are not vigilant enough and allow themselves to be deceived by the EU dictatorship and maneuvered into its clutches, then a creeping loss of sovereignty will take hold in Switzerland, as well as an increasingly clear dependence on the Union dictatorship, which is becoming more and more compelling. The fact is, however, that their sense of power will spread very quickly throughout Europe and will therefore also include Switzerland. Then it will also come to pass, if those responsible for the country and the sensible part of the population do not remember freedom and peace, do not defend themselves against the dictatorial demands and measures of the dictatorship and do not reject them, that in the course of time, the Union dictatorship, which is developing ever more totalitarian, will deceitfully mislead Switzerland and its population with lies and deceit and integrate them into the dictatorship. So it is to be warned once again that the whole thing will also apply to Switzerland if, as a result of the ignorance, unreasonableness, and irresponsibility of leading governments responsible for negotiating with the dictatorship, and of that ill-advised part of the people who will flirt thoughtlessly with the dictatorship. The repressive demands of the Union dictatorship should be obeyed. As a result, Switzerland and its people would be financially exploited and steadily more harassed and deprived of independence by Union dictatorship laws, as well as by its rules, ordinances, and regulations. This would be the case if the uninformed negotiators and the uninformed part of the people were blinded by the Union dictatorship, and if they were to submit to the insidious demands of the Union dictatorship against the will of the people by means of anti-freedom resolutions, unfair contracts, and coercion. Only if the Swiss people oppose these actions of those responsible but irresponsible rulers who negotiate with the dictatorship by means of popular resolutions can Switzerland be prevented from ending up as a vassal state of the Union dictatorship in the coming third millennium. So, as in the whole world, if Switzerland and its people do not act with reason and rationality against the unfreedom and subjugating demands and underhandedness of the Union dictatorship, and if the government does not exercise reason and rationality, an unpeaceful state of affairs will also develop in Switzerland between the government and the Swiss people and the Union dictatorship. Everything will continue as it has done since time immemorial, and will take on even worse forms, because a great many human beings in this world will become unstoppably and terribly brutalized, more and more unconnected, more and more indifferent, and more violent, which will be the inevitable consequence of the ever faster growing world population, which will create enormous problems of many kinds which can no longer be controlled at the time of the next millennium. There will also be a flight of peoples with immense streams of refugees when Germany's incapable, high-handed, unpredictable and unaccountable leaders irresponsibly trigger worldwide streams of refugees, which will degenerate into a human catastrophe with thousands of deaths. But there will also be much other mischief arising from everything, consequently brutality, unconscionability and widespread violence, murders and manslaughter, steadily growing criminality and rampant criminality, as well as discord, manifold murders, and acts of violence in families. In future times, new and extremely vicious religious and fanatical aberrations will also arise, which have already occurred again and again since time immemorial, and which have led to extremely fanatical religious wars, but which in the coming times will continue to break out again and again, caused by criminal and viciously degenerated leading religious fanatics, whereby their bloody terrorism will take such inhuman, brutal and murderous forms, which will be worse than all brutality and inhumanity. Everything has been and is still taking place in this present world war, which has now emerged as a global war from the Nazi delusion for another 3 months. In the coming times, however, more and more bloodthirsty terrorist organizations, mostly based on religion and thus on faith, will brutally torture and murder hundreds of thousands of human beings worldwide, as has been done for thousands of years, when these degenerations arose from the delusion of faith and the resulting persecution of people of other faiths, and which will also continue in the future. Every religion, as well as every deity, corresponds to a delusion of faith, which is not of a god, but, like the god himself, an irrational invention of human beings, created or newly created by imagination, by a fantasy, desires, and a need for something higher. Every god and every religion, however, does not correspond to a power that prevents evil and protects the good, but deities and religions are the protectors and preservers of evil, which protects all evils and constantly promotes and nourishes them, and further advances all horrors, wars, deaths, destructions, and all corruption. Everything that corresponds to deities and religions of faith and everything that arises from them is founded in fundamental misconceptions which blind and confuse the minds and reason of human beings, make them fall into delusions, and make them in bondage to and dependent on faith. In this way, every religion and every faith connected with it, and thus every belief in God in general, damages the clear thinking ability of human beings, whereby their self-awareness, self-feeling, and their rational and reason-based self-determination and self-responsibility are blunted, suppressed, and finally eradicated and destroyed. But human beings are not abstract beings who live outside the world. Consequently, they have to live with it and with everything that exists in it. For the world and the natural system given on it, with all its manifold plant kingdom and all the manifold walking, flying, crawling, creeping, and swimming life forms, is their sphere of life. And this world is the true reality as it was created by the creation, which was or is not a god, conceived by human beings, but the primordial, the entire infinity of celestial space, note Ptaah, universe. And this creation produced and produces no religion, no God, and no faith, but only reality, truth, love, and certainty. While human beings, in their delusion, created a wrong understanding of creation, a faith in God, and confused religions because they had and continue to have wrong and confused ways of thinking. Religion and faith in God are the general delusions of the human beings of this world, and thus also their general false consolation for their hardships, their misery, and their sufferings, just as they are their justification for all evil and all evils which they do, including wars, murders, all killing, torturing, destroying, and raping, complete annihilation, extermination, and all forms of every possible exercise of violence. This is in truth the dreadful, horrible, and terrible realization by human beings of their self-created evil and their exhaustively degenerated being, from which they are no longer able to recognize any true reality and truth, and only have an inkling of understanding and reason because they do not recognize themselves as the highest being and have given themselves up in the delusion of belief in a God they have invented and which does not exist. It has become impossible for human beings, through their confused belief in God, to fight against religion and the illusory God invented by human beings, against their confusion and their delusion of religion and belief, because such a fight would be indirectly directed against themselves, for their delusion and their religion dominate them, against which they are unable to defend themselves. A struggle against any religion and a delusional belief in a sham deity, as well as that the human being could turn away from it and free himself from it, is impossible as a result of his pathological and confused delusion of God. This is because the delusional belief has a slavishly self-initiating, suppressing effect, and no personal individual own thought can arise to fathom reality and truth. Consequently, neither intellect nor reason can be used. Therefore, human beings who are delusional are not able to fight against their faith, because a fight against their faith by a person who is delusional would be indirectly directed against themselves. This is precisely because his delusion and his religion control him down to the last fibre of his thoughts and feelings in such a way that he cannot defend himself against them and is unable to use either reason or intellect, as a result of which he remains slavishly imprisoned in his delusional stupidity. Their mind and reason are so rotten that they can find no or hardly any way to save what remains of delusion-free mind and clear reason. Clear mind and conscious reason are so blocked in believers by their delusion that they can neither perceive reality nor its truth. Basically, believers are so dominated by their faith that in their delusion of faith they are deaf, blind, and dismissive with regard to the effective real reality, and are therefore also unable to grasp the factual truth. Everything corresponds to a religious and God-believing misery in an expression of real misery, which works against understanding and reason in such a way that this malignant misery of faith in God and religion reaches ever further and deeper and drives the believers into ever more degenerate depravity, whereby they become ever more miserable and oppressed groaning creatures. Degenerate creatures who selfishly and egotistically see only themselves and their advantages, while the neighbor next to them becomes more and more an enemy to be had and killed. Every religion and every God belief connected with it is cash poison for the self-realization of human beings. And moreover, religion and faith stir up an illusory, miserable happiness and a false security and contentment, which, however, are very far from any realities. But with all these degenerations, it will not be enough, for everything will increase the longer, the more, far into the third millennium, and will become more and more evil. For these depravities, which are devised and executed as spawned of all evil and all evils of human sense, will bring mankind and the world to the brink of extinction and utter destruction. And this will be so if it is not listened to and acted upon, which you will teach mankind through your work and also proclaim to it prophetically and predictively. And to the prevalence of all these and many more Earth humans' degenerations of the same kind will also be added the addiction to money and profit, which will run rampant in a completely uncontrollable way. This will also include the application of deadly poisons to the natural system in order to promote food growth and greater harvests, and to kill plant pests and inhibit or destroy weed species in their growth. Although in every respect, everything in this respect will only be for the sake of profit. In the process, however, many useful and even vital insects, as well as all kinds of mammals and other living beings important for the functioning of the natural system, as well as plants, will be poisoned, killed and exterminated. And humans will also fall ill, suffer and die as a result of the poisons, because all the toxins introduced into the natural system will be deposited in the food plants, the soil, many living beings, as well as in the waters, harvested products, and also in those slaughtered animals, which also serve as food for human being. So far, I have necessary things to explain to you today, but I will instruct you in this matter several more times, because many more facts and events of the near and further future will have to be revealed to you. I guess that answers your questions?
They are, yes. To that end, I also think that in the future I do not want to burden you with the things, explanations, and conversations that have come out of the time with your father Svath.